Good morning, friends. Welcome to South by Southwest EDU, and oh my goodness, it is awesome to see all y'all here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm Ron Reed with South by Southwest EDU, and on behalf of South by Southwest, and especially the spectacular team at South by Southwest EDU, thank you all so much for being here. I didn't imagine the moment to be quite so moving, like it's been a while, right? So again, we appreciate it. We last gathered for the opening keynote of South by Southwest EDU 3 years ago in 2019 in this room. The past few years have been difficult for all of us, for you and your families, for your colleagues and your learners, and certainly for us here at South by Southwest. As I shared last year, welcoming you to our online program in 2021, we've missed you. Austin has missed you, and it's clear you've missed one another. The energy to gather together again is palpable and exciting, and we couldn't be more pleased. Thank you again for being here. As always, we thank you for lending your voice to this year's South by Southwest EDU. Our community-fueled program this season is super rich. It includes almost 1,000 speakers, more than 400 different learning experiences, including sessions and workshops, mentors and roundtables, performances, competitions, and our EDU Expo downstairs. Parties and socials are occurring all across town, including this evening's opening party at the Speakeasy at 4th and Congress that begins at 7:30 p.m. The South by EDU Conference and Festival is back, and we couldn't be more excited. Thank you all for being here. I've promised the opening speaker that I won't take too much of her time, but a few more quick highlights before beginning today's program. Tomorrow's keynote will be fascinating. When culture wars come to school, same time, same room. We'll look forward to seeing you. Also, tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m., please join us for the International Women's Day celebration at Antone's, which is one of Austin's classic music clubs right on 5th Street. A comment about our COVID protocols and protections. We're very fortunate in Austin to be at stage 2, which is a tremendous improvement from where we have been for many, many, many months. We've committed to each of you, and indeed all of our registrants across South by Southwest EDU 2022, that this would be a masked event. This only works if we all respect one another, so please, please wear your mask, practice kindness, and know it'll be reciprocated. Another quick comment in terms of particulars, and that involves Q&A, which will be facilitated by Slido, both via our mobile app for those of you in the room, and for those of you at home or joining us through our online program, you can do it through the online schedule by clicking the Engage button. That's how we'll fuel your interaction with today's speaker and other speakers across the event. As the South by EDU team worked on this year's event and reflected on our collective work, we're reminded each and every day of the critical role that education plays in society. As we explored the drivers that move the education community to action, we identified 4 themes that unify much of our thinking and work at South by Southwest EDU. And those themes are power, resilience, boundless curiosity, and humanity. Certainly, it's boundless curiosity that brings us all together today. And resilience is something we've learned we all share. Permit me a special shout out again to the South by EDU team who has worked tirelessly to put this event together and has been an inspiration to me for the last 2 years. I can't thank them. And of course, when I think of resilience, forgive me, I think of the brave people of Ukraine. I just want to say our hearts go out to all of you who may have family fighting for that country. Our next theme, humanity, is at the heart of our collective work. It's what drives us all. Again, we couldn't be happier to see you and spend the next several days together, learning from one another, making new friends and colleagues, collaborating to extend and drive our impact, and frankly, having some fun along the way. The final theme we associate with South by Southwest EDU is power. Education is power, and as I look across this room and think about the South by EDU community, it's mighty powerful indeed. It provides an appropriate segue as I introduce our opening keynote speaker, author of the book Powerful Teaching. The work this community does is indeed powerful. Your ability to empower your learners and one another is really inspiring. Great teaching is both an art and a science, so it's a treat to see if we can expand our collective proficiencies armed with the insights from our first speaker today. Please help me give a really warm South by Southwest EDU welcome to educator, cognitive psychologist, and author, and the opening speaker for South by Southwest EDU, Dr. Pooja Agarwal. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to South by Southwest EDU. I'm a teacher, so we're going to start with a warm-up. Yeah, I've got a trivia question for us. I'm going to show you the question. There are 3 options. Mentally pick your option, and then we're going to take a good old-fashioned vote with a raise of your hand, okay? So the trivia question is this. How many bones are in the human body? Is it A, 124, B, 186, or C, 206, 206? So pick your thought, the option, and let's just take a vote. I'd like you to close your eyes. We're not influenced, we're not cheating. Go ahead and close your eyes. If you would say the number of bones in the human body is A, 124, raise your hand, please. If it is 186, B, raise your hand, please. And if it is 206, 206, raise your hand, please. Thank you. So I would say we did pretty well. About 70% got this correct. The correct answer is 206. We have each of us about 206 bones in our body. I once was corrected by a teacher that this is in the adult human body, right? When we're born, it's different, so thank you, science teachers. As we're getting going, I wanted to let you know that all of today's research and resources are available at this website, retrievalpractice.org/SXSW. So I've got downloads there, announcements about my book signings today and tomorrow, and I've got key takeaways from the keynote this morning. So here's a challenge for you. I'd like you to not take notes. Oh, okay, that's scary. Don't take notes, okay? Don't take notes. So please put away your paper and pens, your iPads, your devices. You won't need to take notes. I'll provide you with that opportunity in a few minutes. Great. So I am a scientist. I'm a cognitive scientist. I've been conducting research on how students learn for 15 years. I'm also a teacher. I started my career in K-12, and currently as a college professor, I teach about 85 students every semester. Now, a few years ago, this is what my classroom looked like. We were in person. These are my college students. I teach at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. I do not teach music. I'm not a musician. I teach psychology and neuroscience with music students, and I love it, especially because my students are from all around the world. Even in this photo, I've got students from Madagascar, Australia, Peru, Spain, Canada, the United States, China, and Korea. It's incredibly diverse, and I love teaching science at a music school. More recently, my classroom looked like this. So I taught on Zoom for a year and a half, like many of us here in the room, and today my classroom looks like this. At the start of the school year in the fall, we moved to in-person with masks. So I hope this paints a picture of the context of what education looks like today. Next, I'd like you to think back to your educational experience. Picture yourself in maybe your favorite class in college, or in high school. Also a class that you had to study really hard for. Okay, so remember, think back, I'm thinking about my Greek mythology class in college. I really had to study for those exams, okay? So think about when you had to study for this class. Maybe you started studying, you became maybe discouraged, a little bored, right? Studying's not that much fun. Then maybe you started getting really discouraged. I am just not gonna do well. I'm studying, but this isn't gonna go well, and then you get really anxious. What's gonna happen? I'm gonna bomb the exam. The next day on the exam, you do really well. Hooray! You did really well in that exam. So studying and cramming, rereading your notes and your textbook and staying up all night, pulling an all-nighter, it paid off. And then what happens the next day? Oh, you forget it all. Isn't that fun? No, that is so frustrating. It's all gone. You spent all that time studying and, oops, you've forgotten it all. I don't remember much from my Greek mythology class, okay? This is frustrating for our students. They've invested time and energy with us. And this is frustrating for us. How many times do we have to reteach? A student says, well, I didn't learn that last year. We're like, yes, you did. Yes, you did. And then we have to reteach. So this forgetting process is frustrating. And my question today is this. Why do students forget? Why does this keep happening? Typically, as teachers, as educators, we focus on getting information into students' heads. And this takes a lot of typical forms. There's teaching, we've got lessons, there are activities in the classroom. We want to help students learn. And this first stage of learning, in a very simplistic memory model, is what we call encoding. It's getting information into students' heads when they study. That's what they're doing. They're reading their textbook or their notes. So it's getting information inside of our heads with encoding. And then we hope that information sticks. The difference, based on 100 years of research, is that we go from the encoding stage to storage. What we know is where the magic happens with learning is when we focus on getting information out of students' heads. So it's a little bit of a switch. We often focus on getting information into students' heads. Let's focus on getting information out of their heads. So even now, when you thought back to your college experience, when I asked you that trivia question, that's pulling information out. When you talk to a friend about the podcast you just listened to, that's getting information out, and that boosts students' long-term learning. That's it. That's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So this is what we call retrieval practice. It's retrieving that information, pulling it out, mentally traveling, and then we want our students to practice this retrieval. A simple example is from my music students. My students have to practice their instruments. They can't cram the night before a high-stakes gig. They practice their instruments. And in our classroom, we need to help our students practice their knowledge as well. Think about your own classroom. Even when you start a meeting, how often do we start by reviewing information? All right, class, here's what we did yesterday. Here's what we did in class last week. That's reviewing. Great. That's getting information into students' heads. One of the simplest ways to focus on getting information out of students' heads with retrieval is to just ask them, what did we do in class yesterday? Instead of telling them, here's what we did, just ask them. You can provide 30 seconds for students to write this down before you then give feedback and say, yes, that is what we talked about. So it doesn't take any more than just switching from how we begin our classes. I'm going to dive into some strategies. Again, I'm a teacher. What does this mean when I go back and see my classes on Monday? So here's one of the simplest strategies for retrieval practice. We call it a brain dump. In the scientific literature, we call this free recall. This is literally asking students to write down everything they can remember. So my co-author, Patrice Bain, of our book, Powerful Teaching, she writes about how she has her 6th grade history students do a brain dump at the end of their unit on ancient Egypt. Write down everything you can remember. And these 6th graders are so excited about seeing what they know and retrieving it and pulling it out of their heads. So a brain dump could take a long time, could take a short amount of time, very flexible. A more simple sort of brain dump, a more simple strategy for retrieval practice is just 2 things. Ask students to retrieve 2 things. So with my students, I ask them, what are 2 things you remember from our unit on childhood development? That's it, pretty straightforward. What are 2 things you remember from the unit on anatomy? It's just retrieving 2 things. And the reason why retrieval practice boosts students' long-term learning is because of this mental struggle. We call it a desirable difficulty. It's a difficulty, but it's desirable, just like my students practicing their instrument. So another retrieval example, as I've mentioned, is to ask students, what did you learn in class today? This could be an exit ticket right after class. An added mental struggle is to ask students, what did we do in class yesterday? That added mental struggle is what we call spacing, and it's really fun for students. So as a parent, you might ask your child, what did you learn in school today? And they say, nothing, right? But if you ask a kid, what did you learn in school yesterday? Did I say today? What did you learn in school today? What did you learn in school yesterday? Now they're challenged. And you might see some eyes light up. Instead of just, what did you learn in school today? Well, it's so fresh that there's not really anything exciting to tell you about it. So ask your students, what did you learn in class yesterday? Another popular activity, if you use Think, Pair, Share. Can you raise your hand, please? Yeah, very popular, right? We give students a prompt, think about how this concept relates to your everyday life, then they pair up with each other, and then they share with class. Here's a picture of my students engaging in Think, Pair, Share. What you don't see in this photograph is the think step. And so often, we skip the think step. That's where retrieval practice happens. When you're doing Think, Pair, Share, don't skip the think step. So simple to switch from getting information in to getting it out. I want to point out that you know your content best. We know from a lot of research that retrieval practice is flexible for all content areas. So whether you teach math or science or language arts, you are a teacher with flexibility and creativity. So this is where you customize retrieval practice for your content area. So let's say mathematics has a lot of retrieval already. Those are practice problems. But instead of having students, we used the phrase when I was a kid, plug and chug. Instead of having students just kind of go through addition problems and then subtraction problems, mix up similar problems to add that mental struggle. It's a technique we call interleaving. If you're teaching in science, again, you can ask students for 2 things. Even if you're teaching language arts, have students retrieve the difference between when they use a colon and a semicolon. Or have them retrieve an example of each one. So retrieval practice, very flexible for your content area. Okay, I'm a skeptic. Some of you might be skeptics. So here's what retrieval practice is not. Does it require more prep? No. We don't want more prep. That's not fun. That's not easy. Does it require more class time? No. Retrieval practice can take 2 seconds as students walk into the classroom and exit ticket as they walk out. I know we all have so much content we want to cover. It does not have to take more class time. Does it take more grading? No, it doesn't. Grading is not something that someone says, I love grading. We don't want more of that. I don't want more of that. So retrieval practice does not require more grading. In fact, I'll talk a little bit more about how you don't have to grade it at all. Is retrieval practice the same thing as testing? No, 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 no. It is not the same thing as more testing, and here's why. Because retrieval practice is a learning strategy, not an assessment strategy. During summative assessment, students are retrieving, they're pulling information out, but we want to highlight that retrieval, this comfort with practicing their instrument, practicing their knowledge. That's a learning strategy that research demonstrates boosts our students' long-term learning. Isn't this cool? You already do it, right? You already do it all the time in classrooms, on tech tools, so I'm not asking you to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't need to do that. I'm not asking you to completely change your course design or the way you grade students. I like to keep it simple. So here's an example of keeping it simple. How many bones are in the human body? 206. Okay, that took 2 seconds. Moving on. So are you ready for my favorite research-based tool for retrieval practice? Yeah, cool. It's a pencil. Pretty easy, keeping it simple here. A large proportion of research on retrieval practice was literally with paper and pencil. So you can have students just write down their brain dump. You don't need anything fancy. I'm also a big fan of index cards. Students can pick them up as they walk in, or I can hand them out, because then if I just want to pause class, it's kind of dragging a little bit, and we just want to engage in some retrieval, then students already have the index cards to write on. I don't have to ask them to take out paper, then they open their backpacks, then they're trying to figure out if they can borrow paper, and then they rip out the paper, and then there's all that gross fringe. We don't like that. So with index cards, you can hand them out, you can collect them, you can shuffle them, you can then hand them back to different students, you can keep them. Simple, easy tool. Tech tools obviously include a lot of retrieval practice. You already do this. Maybe you use Kahoot, for example. I'm a big fan of Flipgrid, where students post selfie-like videos. To me, that's much more engaging as retrieval practice, to be honest, than a discussion board on Canvas. So tech tools use retrieval practice all the time. At home, our students can do retrieval practice as part of homework. So I do have students read their book before class, but then I ask them to retrieve. So my students kind of have mini homework, mini quizzes that are all on Google Forms. And they're each worth about 2% of students' grades. Very low stakes, not a midterm or a final. I don't have a midterm or a final in my class. Low stakes Google Forms. And I talk to my students at the beginning of the semester about how they're going to forget. That's how learning works, is we also forget. So on the Google Forms, I ask students, what do you remember from class last week? What do you remember from the unit about childhood development? And with Google Forms, students can take their time. 40% of my students are English language learners. And a number of them have shared with me that the Google Forms are so helpful because they can take their time at home to think and retrieve. I also embed feedback, a very important component of retrieval practice. So once students submit, they can see my feedback. And then we can have a rich discussion in class the next day. And that's so much fun for me and so much fun for my students. Also, it takes me less than 30 seconds to grade each student's Google form. That's pretty cool, yeah. Even though they are writing a lot and I can see that they're writing a lot, I pick out examples to share in class. So that's how I do some of my grading and assignments in class. If you're teaching remotely, retrieval practice is flexible. Let's say as an entry ticket, students get into a routine of typing in one thing they remember from the last class into the chat. So by the time we kind of have those stragglers joining the Zoom, they can already see a list of cool stuff from your last class. Or you can do that as an exit ticket. Of course, you can put students in breakout groups, work on some collaborative retrieval, and then come back together. Or a think, pair, share, but make sure students think before they pair and share. Here's some additional research-based tips to help you with retrieval practice, but keep it simple again. So we know that there is no optimal timing for retrieval practice. In general, delayed a little bit is more effective for learning. There's also no optimal amount. So I say you do you. You keep it simple. So however often you can provide this, however many times you can provide this, any time is better than none. Research also demonstrates that any question type improves student learning. So whether it's an open-ended brain dump, it's multiple choice, it's short answer, those all benefit students as well. And keep it quick. Just like the trivia fact, it can be really quick and keep it low stakes, or like I said, you don't have to grade it at all. I love when I have students retrieve in class on paper, and then they walk up to me at the end of class and they start handing me the paper. And I'm like, I just like to stand there. I just wait. And then they say, well, aren't you gonna take this? Don't you need to grade it? I'm like, no, that's for you. Those are your notes, you can keep them or you can toss them, but thanks for retrieving in class. So let's give ourselves permission to not grade at all with our retrieval. It's so ingrained in our system. Every time students retrieve, we don't have to grade it. So keep it simple. Just like you know your content best, you know your students best. So whether you teach early childhood, K-12, college, you provide professional development to adult learners, you teach graduate students, this is all flexible for your students. Even for early childhood, you could have students retrieve and then indicate how they're feeling about that retrieval with a smiley face or a sad face. Very straightforward. You know your students the best. In terms of the science of learning, so I'm just going to share a few additional findings. One is that I want to mention again that researchers have spent more than 100 years looking at the benefits of retrieval practice. There are mentions about it from ancient philosophers centuries ago. Most of that 100 years of research was conducted in laboratory settings. We have college students come into a lab, we sit them down in front of a computer, they look at words, they retrieve, and then we give them a test of their memory later. What all of that laboratory research shows is that retrieval practice boosts learning. So we've got a century of data and research demonstrating this simple technique improves learning. We also know from laboratory research that retrieval practice improves complex, higher order learning. Oftentimes I get the question, well, this sounds like it's for names, dates, facts, vocabulary words, but you can ask students complex questions and benefit their transfer of knowledge. So one example is in my cognitive psychology class, I teach students about a basic memory principle called the serial position effect. And in the serial position effect, we as humans tend to remember the beginning of things, and we remember the end of things, but not the stuff in the middle. So one of my favorite movies is The Princess Bride, and I can tell you the opening scene, and I can tell you the last scene, and I love the stuff in the middle, but I can't necessarily tell you all of that. Now, in terms of higher order learning, when my students learn about the serial position effect, I ask them, tell me an example from your own life. I don't review what the serial position effect is. They have to retrieve that in order to get to a real life example. So then they will share a very simple idea, which is when they learn music. They tend to learn the beginning of songs and the end of songs, but not in the middle. So we know from research that students should kind of mix it up, what we call interleaving. So that's an example where, again, I'm not telling students about this concept. I'm not reviewing it. I'm not defining it. I don't ask them to memorize it. But I can ask complex questions to help them apply it and transfer that knowledge. Okay, so that's laboratory research. What does that look like in real classrooms? My colleagues and I spent more than 10 years conducting research in middle school and high school classrooms near St. Louis, Missouri. And over those 10 years, we compared teachers' lessons with quick quizzes. At the time, they were clicker quizzes, before Kahoot. And our students participated in teacher lessons with like a 4-minute clicker quiz or without. So even research-wise, we didn't change the teacher's curriculum or their lessons. It was just literally 4 minutes on this clicker quiz or not. We played around with a bunch of other things. But over 10 years, we found that even those quick quizzes raised students' grades from a C to an A level. And we measured students' learning even 9 months later at the end of the school year. And we found that students remembered information from the beginning of the school year, in September, October, much more effectively when their teachers had provided retrieval practice. We also know from research in the same 10 years, we asked about 2,000 students, again, middle school and high school, we asked them, does retrieval practice make you more anxious? Kind of going back to this idea that retrieval practice is not testing, but does it make you more anxious? 75% of our students said no. Retrieval practice reduces their anxiety. They know what they know. They know what they don't know. We call that metacognition. They're prepared for an exam. They know what's going to happen. And they've learned a bunch. So retrieval practice reduces student anxiety. Much more recently, my colleagues and I conducted a literature review. So we looked at all of the research on retrieval practice conducted in authentic classrooms. We screened almost 2,000 abstracts in the literature. We coded them, we had lots of spreadsheets, we're scientists. You can actually get that on my website at retrievalpractice.org. And we found that retrieval practice benefited students around the world, K-12, high school, college, graduate school. And it really solidified our understanding that retrieval practice boosts learning regardless of content area, regardless of the age of student, regardless of the timing or the feedback or the question type. So retrieval practice is powerful. And it's the simple switch that we can keep in 1 minute or less in our classrooms. In terms of what happens next in the science of learning, I'm very excited about 2 things in particular. One is that we need research with more diverse students. And 2, in order to make that happen, we need more collaborations with people like you. So please help us. We need your help to make this happen, and I'm so excited to see where this field goes next. Now we're going to take a moment to think and retrieve. So this is your turn to now retrieve your notes. So I'm serious, take out your paper and your pencils, your iPads, cell phones, maybe you've got a Google Doc. So take a minute, I'm literally going to stand here silent and let you retrieve. What is something you've learned so far? Another retrieval question I like is, what is something you want to remember 10 years from now? If I send you an email, I come knock on your door, what's something you want to remember 10 years from now? So take a moment and retrieve one thing you've learned. It looks like you're all taking an exam, but you're just retrieving. And while you're retrieving, I'll go ahead and put this up again. The research resources, free downloads are available at retrievalpractice.org/SXSW, South by Southwest. You're welcome to tweet what you've retrieved so far as well. So we have some time for a Q&A. Again, you can go to the South by Southwest EDU app. You find the session, you click on Engage, and then there you can add your questions to the Q&A. So if we could bring up those questions, please. or I can just answer random questions. I'm good at that. Okay, so one question I often get is this whole grading component. I don't want to grade all this stuff. It sounds like it takes a lot of time. I'll give you an example from my classroom. I don't give a midterm and a final, or papers. The first time students retrieve should not be on a midterm or a final. That is not the first time they should retrieve. So instead, I have weekly retrieval practices. And my students have to retrieve what they learned in class last week. They have to retrieve what they learned long ago. And with those weekly assignments, as I mentioned, they're low stakes. They're worth about 2 to 5% of my students' grades. They build up over time. I even drop some of the lowest grades so that there's flexibility for attendance. And my guess, I should do research on this, is it takes me less time to grade each week than it does if I had a big old midterm and a big old final. Those are like 3 days of miserable grading with a midterm and a final or big papers. So just consider breaking it down week by week. That gets into a little more planning to switch to that, and that's why I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. Other questions on Slido? Yes, I see a question.
If you're not testing or not seeing what they retrieve, how do you make sure that how they remember it is correct? How do you find out if maybe they didn't understand something or they're confused or they just remember wrong?
Yeah, thank you for asking. What's your name? Tracy. Tracy asked, so how do you make sure that students are getting things correct? If students are retrieving incorrect answers, what can you do about that? Feedback. A lot of us provide feedback. It's a natural part of life. One thing to keep in mind is as you're here at South by Southwest is to retrieve names. And if we get comfortable with that discomfort, then feedback is kind of no big deal. So yesterday, I got to meet teachers from Illinois, where I'm born and raised. So I met Kathy and Sherry and Kay. I met a second-year teacher named Erin, and that's all retrieval. And then I feel comfortable asking for feedback. Did I get that right? And they'll say, yeah, you did. Or actually, no, it's Jason, not Jeff. Okay? So providing feedback is important. And of course, feedback can take some time. That's why I like the Google Forms with the embedded feedback. So that provides students with immediate feedback. I provide delayed feedback when we talk in class. You could do a quick think, pair, share, but don't skip the think step. Or think about it a different way. It's almost like having students retrieve before you give them feedback, instead of just skipping to that feedback part, which is the reviewing. So just take a moment to have them retrieve before giving the feedback that you're probably giving already. So we're going to move on, and I'd like us to imagine what this looks like. Now, moving forward, what does all of this science of learning actually look like? How do we switch from the frustrations that happen when students are focused on getting information, cramming it in, and we switch to retrieving? That's really exciting. It's a lot more fun. Students learn more and over the long term. Imagine students who look a bit frustrated, but they're actually just enjoying that mental struggle. If we talk about the science of learning with our students, they'll recognize that this struggle is a good thing for learning. Easy learning is easy forgetting. Challenging learning strengthens our remembering, our learning, our memories as well. Also, keep in mind that when students are comfortable with their own knowledge, I mentioned metacognition, they feel good. They have that knowledge. They're learning. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that, of course, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. As much as I'm advocating for thinking about and imagining retrieval practice, there's a lot going on for us and for our students. I got an email, oh, it kind of makes me want to cry. I got an email from a student this morning who's really struggling mentally. I've got students who are struggling mentally and physically. Many of us are struggling right now as well. So I'd just like to acknowledge that I recognize there's a lot going on for all of us in the field of education, which is one reason why imagining what something as simple as retrieval practice can do to shape and move that learning forward when students are successful. They graduate, they feel comfortable, and there's less anxiety. Imagine also how parents can help their children at home. Before a student completes one of those lovely worksheets or homework, before that happens, a parent could just ask their child to write down 2 things about that class before they move on to their homework. That's it. So parents can start feeling comfortable creating this environment at home, and students can begin to use these strategies independently. It is so important that we model these strategies for our students inside the classroom so that then they can apply them on their own independently outside the classroom. So that's really cool to imagine. Imagine also a school culture where even if a student's waiting for the school bus, the literacy coach is asking them what they went over for the day and having the student retrieve. Or students are passing by in the hallway, or students in the office waiting for something. And we just take that opportunity to just ask, what are you thinking about? What was something cool you learned yesterday? It starts building that culture. Also, we can do this for ourselves. How many staff meetings do we sit through? Where the beginning is like, let's review the minutes, or here's what we talked about last time. We literally can use retrieval practice ourselves. Start the staff meeting with retrieval practice, a brain dump, 2 things, and so on. So we start building this culture. Imagine when the entire school is using retrieval and it becomes no big deal. It's just webbed, interwoven into the way the school goes. So let's switch from all of this frustration with forgetting and move beyond to long-term learning. So here's something I hope you've learned. How many bones are in the adult human body? 206. So make sure, please, to retrieve and unleash the science of learning. Thank you. Thank you very much.